Hey my friend, Sam Haymart for Test Driven TV. We're out here on a 110-degree day in the desert, and I've got my latest test drive vehicle here, and I gotta tell you, I'm pretty excited about it because the Jeep Renegade it's the new one. It's the new one that's getting all the attention for the obvious reasons. But the best part about it is it's a four-wheel drive. It's the base sport model, which means it's the one that most people can afford. And this one also has a manual, which means that 1.4-liter turbocharged engine, which again, that's the magic combination a lot of people are curious about. So let's test drive it, see what it's all about. Now, before we get started with our test drive, I've got to show you a couple things because, well, there's a lot to look at here. The first thing is, I love this color on this thing. I love yellows in general, but on this one, this particular vehicle with this color, to me, looks like kind of like a big rubber duck, doesn't it? I mean, it looks like it ought to be floating in your bathtub and squeaking when you squeeze it. All kidding aside, though, this is a Jeep that has styling that's been very controversial, just like the Cherokee that came before it. People love it or they hate it, but what they've done here, at least, it actually has a Jeep face. You've got the headlights with a 7-bar grille here in the middle, so it actually has a little bit more tradition than does the Cherokee. But one thing Jeep really did with this vehicle, and we'll especially be talking about this when we get inside, is they made sure you know it's a Jeep by not only making it look like one, but Jeep logos are everywhere. And we'll start with these headlights right here. Now, these are just halogen reflector headlights, but if you look very closely right in the center, there's a Jeep grill logo. And we're gonna be talking about that because it shows up several times on this car inside and out. Now, because this is a base model, very basic, no fog lights, but this does have a nice big black spoiler on the bottom, and black continues because around the side here, we've got black steel wheels. I love steel wheels on an off-road vehicle. I always have, especially on a Wrangler or some of the other SUVs that have kind of an old school vibe. And while these are not really old school styled, they are steelies, and I just kind of, I don't know why, it really kind of gives it a nice look that it really shouldn't. And I know a lot of you probably aren't going to agree with that, but they do tie in well with the black plastic cladding that wraps around this thing. From this perspective, the love-hate thing is going to continue for a lot of people because it's just as bold, just as different back here as it is up front. And so if you look at the Jeep Patriot, the Jeep Cherokees of the past, they've always had this really square, basic kind of plain wrapper approach. Here, we're not getting that. This has a very pronounced kick up here in the side window profile, which some people love, some people hate. And when you get back here, you've got an integrated spoiler up here with the third brake light. And again, Jeep had to make sure and remind us that we're looking at a Jeep because not only does it say it everywhere, but here in these taillights, we've got a little icon of that grill face again. And there's also an X, and that really ties into the gas tank stamping that you'd see on an old military Jeep with the gas can sitting there. So the styling, it's really just something that you're either going to have to get your hands around and warm up to it or move on to another model. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the interior since this is really an off-road test, and we have another review on the Jeep Renegade, a two-wheel drive, and you can see the link to that down below where I get very detailed on the interior. Here, I really want to touch on a few things that I find most interesting, and that is, this is a base level model, a very inexpensive car for starting price, yet it's got a very high quality interior. These materials, much higher than you'd expect for its price range, and I'm talking about the overall feel of it, the look of it. It doesn't feel bargain basement, and that's a good thing. And these seats, cloth seats, they're very comfortable, with one exception, and that is the fact that the height adjustment on these, when you lower it and raise it, it's really sort of hinging on the front. You can't actually lower the front of the seat. And the one problem that has caused, both for me and some of the drivers in our office, is the fact that because it is pretty high up, to be able to push the clutch all the way to the floor, you need to move the seat a little more far forward than you might like. And that creates problems for the steering wheel distance. Even though it is adjustable, adjustable. Shorter drivers in our office did have a little bit of a problem finding a comfortable spot for driving and being able to get that clutch to the floor. So just a point of order there. Overall, though, I really like what they've done with this interior, especially in terms of making it fun. And we talked about that on the outside, and we're going to talk about it here on the inside. There's logos everywhere, Jeep logos, reminders you're in a Jeep. It says Jeep right here. There's Jeep logos on each one of the rear view mirrors. Over there on the windshield, right at the base of the windshield, this little icon of an old Jeep crawling up a hill. When I first saw it, I thought it was a little bit of maybe they got tar on the edge of the windshield, some sealant that they squirted on it just wrong, until I really looked closely. To Jeep. Down here on the center console, there's a map, and the theme just continues throughout. Down here in the bottom of the cup holders, there's the X design that you find in the taillight, and even in the cloth seats here, the Jeep logo shadowed there in the cloth. So they've really gone to a lot of effort to really make it something special. As you can see here, space back here for the rear seat passengers it's a compact. These are about halfway forward, halfway back. So if they came back any further, my knees would be up against these seats. And the seating position, a little bit on the low side too. And I will point out, there are no adjustments, no seat back rake, nor is there a sliding adjustments, and there aren't vents back here. Now, this does have one nice feature, both for the front passengers and the rear, and that's the MySky roof system. Removable panels, so it's not glass sunroofs, but you can actually take these panels out and put them in the back and get a sort of almost convertible driving experience, which is pretty neat, I think. Now, one thing that you need to know if you're thinking about this system is that when you put them in the back, there's a storage place back right underneath the deck, and that's where they go, so you can stow them away out of the way. But when you get this system, you negate the spare tire because that's where they go. There's an inflator instead. So something you really need to know and think about, because an SUV, if you're going to be doing off-road and adventure and all that, spare tire is kind of a nice thing to have instead of a can of Fix-A-Flat and a pump. Also, these seats, they do fold down in a 60-40 split, as you'd expect. Not exactly a flat load floor, but they do fold down, and the buttons are right on top of the seat backs, and you don't have to remove those headrests, so it's pretty easy to put down. When it comes to scoring this interior, for the most part, I think they've done a pretty good job. There could be a little bit more storage in here. There could be more spaces for this and that. And the driving position especially could be improved. But overall, it gets 4 out of 5 stars. This is the part of the review where I usually give a big, huge rundown on the infotainment system, the touchscreen, navigation, the premium audio. Well, this doesn't have that. This is one step up from the basic radio that's in this vehicle. This is an option. It's one step up. It has radio, AM, FM, and it has Bluetooth, so you can connect to your phone and tie into whatever you're doing there with your audio. It does have a USB connection down here below, as well as a 12-volt port. But what it does have that's most important for the money that you get above and beyond a few extra features is the fact that it has the rear backup camera, and that's really helpful if you're going to be out off-road somewhere, if you're camping, when you're backing into spaces. Good thing to have. The audio is pretty good for a mid-range product, so I'm pretty happy with it. It gets 4 out of 5 stars. First place I always bring every SUV and crossover I test is the Desert Washboard Road, because it's the first test. It's the first thing that tells me whether I'm driving a car with a lift kit or a real crossover SUV. So what I'm finding out here, and one of the first things I wanted to find out, is that this is a step up over the 2-wheel drive Renegade. And that's because when you step up to 4-wheel drive on this vehicle, you get a rubber isolated rear subframe, which helps a lot in the vibration and the harshness. The second thing you get is stronger front suspension arms, and that also pays off in the area of how it feels, as well as how rugged it can be. Now, this is where most people are probably going to call it a day when they take this thing off-roading, but as you know, I like to go one step further. Now, out here on a rougher, tighter trail, which is more what we might call off-roading, though this isn't real off-roading like rock crawling, because this isn't the Trailhawk after all, and we don't really have off-road tires, but this is what you want to be able to do if you go to the trouble of buying a vehicle like this and you decide you're going to put up with the trade-offs that come with an off-road 4-wheel drive vehicle. It's nice to be able to actually do it, right? So I'm out here on my tight little desert trail that I like to test vehicles on. It's nice and rocky, it's got a lot of ruts and bumps in it, and what I'm finding out is that it's fun. Because of its size, it's very agile, because it's light. It's very flingable and tossable, and because of its ground clearance and suspension travel that it has for its size, it just really lets you go. It just lets you do it. Now, this does have part-time four-wheel drive, and I haven't put it in four-wheel drive, I'm just in two-wheel drive, but I will point out that with a lot of these vehicles, front-wheel drive crossovers, you do tend to need to put it in four-wheel drive sooner than you would rear-wheel drive, just because the front wheels can't always get the traction. One thing I do need to point out, because this does have the smaller engine and the manual transmission, when you go up steep hills with this thing, it's very important to keep your revs up, especially if you're starting from a dead stop. Like I'm going up a hill right here, you really need to keep those revs above 2,000 RPM, because you can't just idle and lug up a hill, a very steep one, like you can with a lot of your V6s, V8s, or even larger four cylinders. If you don't keep the revs up, you lose the turbo boost, and then it wants to die on you. And when you're going up to a nice place like this, you don't want to be dying halfway up the hill and having to start over. Now it's time to go back down again. Maybe do this again a couple times. Now, as I mentioned, this chassis being pretty well isolated from the rough stuff and with reasonable ground clearance, this is actually a nice, fun vehicle that I think a lot of people can afford, and it's going to give them some capability that they might expect having to spend a lot more money for. And with the four-wheel drive system that's on this, even though it's not the low range that gives you the crawl ratio that would help on that hill we just went up, as long as you know how to drive it and compensate for the fact that you don't have that low range, you can still get just about everywhere that'll get. And one nice thing about this is with these steel wheels, you don't have to quite worry about smashing up your nice alloys that come with that Trailhawk. Just food for thought. There's always a balance with these things, you know, especially when you're buying an off-road getaway vehicle like this, and you've got a budget. You've always got to think, boy, if I get this, I can do that, but then I can't do this. For my money, if I were buying the Renegade, I'd probably get the Sport, if for no other reason than the fact that it's plain enough and it's inexpensive enough that you're not going to feel like you've got to kid glove the thing. You know what I'm saying? You can have fun with it, not worry about scraping up your silk shoes. Woo! Ha. Okay, I was going to do an e-brake slide there, but it's an electric parking brake. While off-roading's a lot of fun, only about 1 or 2% of buyers of this vehicle are actually going to do much of it. So how this thing performs here on the pavement is really more important, and how it handles when you throw it into a curve is going to be what a lot of people really are going to experience. And the good news is a lot of the improvements we talked about that make it better off-road have also come across to the on-road experience. I'm noticing quite a bit less road noise and vibration out here, largely in part to that rear suspension, which is cradled in bushings. And one thing I will point out, the road noise is a little bit higher, the wind noise is a little bit higher because of these roof panels that are removable. So if you skip those, it'll have a quieter ride. It's just one of those things. Do you want that extra feature enough to have the trade-off of a little bit of extra noise? And they are very noisy when off. You get a lot of wind noise and buffeting in here, which is why they're not off right now, so I can talk to you. Overall, though, I'm very impressed with the elevated ride and handling experience you do get by stepping up to all-wheel drive here. So chassis comes in at 4 out of 5 stars. The Jeep Renegade comes with 2 engines, with a 6-speed manual like ours that comes only with a 1.4-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder good for 160 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque. It's rated at 24 mpg city, 31 mpg highway, and 27 mpg combined. Power? It's a willing little guy. And 60. Alright, so with 160 horsepower and nearly 3,200 pounds of weight in an SUV, this thing isn't blindingly fast, but the great part about this engine is the fact that it's willing. It's fun to listen to, it loves to rev, it's a very playful little engine, and it should be. It's the same engine that you're going to find in the Fiat 500 Abarth. So it fits into a high performance sort of genre when it comes to motors. It's just a sweet little sewing machine. And with the manual here, it's actually very pleasant to drive around town. I will touch on the fact that just like when we were doing the off-road thing and I pointed out that it doesn't have a lot of torque down low, the same goes for on the road. If you're really trying to go out and get some steam out of it, you need to rev it up quite a bit. But as I said, the good part about that is it's pleasant to listen to once you get there. Now, fuel economy, very well this week with this thing, 30 mpg combined, which is well more than promised and identical to what I got last year when I tested the Renegade front-wheel drive Sport with the same transmission. So I'm very impressed in that regard. And a lot of that goes to the fact that this has the fully disconnecting four-wheel drive system, so you really don't lose MPG by going to it. So overall, I give this powertrain 5 full stars. 5. Rating the quality shows high points in the body and interior fit, high quality materials, and an excellent paint finish. Not entirely perfect were the rattles and squeaks that could be heard on rougher roads, particularly from those MySky roof panels. Quality feel comes in at 4 or 5 stars. IIHS safety ratings aren't entirely complete yet for the Jeep Renegade, but it did achieve a good rating on the moderate overlap, the roof strength, and the side impact crash tests. It has an advanced rated crash prevention system option, which means when the tests are done, it could be eligible for a top safety pick plus rating. All right, friends, it's hot out here and I want to get this finished up. As you can see, I did get it a little bit dirty. Got to do that with any Jeep you test. That's just part of the rule. And somehow, even though this is a blazing hot day, I managed to find a mud puddle to splash this thing through. That's how it goes in the desert. It can rain, it can be hot, all at the same time. So as we look at the price here, my biggest takeaway is that what a novelty it is that we can still get a manual transmission in a basic 4x4 today. So many of its competitors, automatic's the only way you can go. That's it. That's how it goes. If you don't like it, don't buy it. Here, you get the choice still, and I love that. The next option up the scale from this to get a manual transmission in an off-road vehicle like this, well, that's the Jeep Patriot, which actually, bizarrely enough, is right around the same price, equipment for equipment, if you look at what's actually selling out there. So the Patriot, even though it's quite older in the showroom, it does offer a slightly different design, maybe more traditional, and the anecdotal evidence out there is that you can actually get that vehicle a little bit less money because of the fact that it is older, more profit margin. This is made in Italy, so they don't have quite as much wiggle room in that price. So it does sell more than this. And honestly, I think some people they're not on board with the styling yet, and they like the tradition that they find there with the Patriot. But either way, they're two great vehicles. I'm very impressed with this in what it offers for the price, with a couple of exceptions. At this price, we've got the roof, that's an option. We have the audio system, and we have air conditioning. It's an option, $1,100 option air conditioning. Here in Arizona, I'm telling you, that's not an option for me. That's base price. So base price on this is really $21 and change, not $19,995, at least for Sam here in the desert. So I put value at 4 out of 5 stars. And when you put that in with everything we talked about, we're at 4 stars for the review. Still pretty good. I'm Sam Haymar for Test Driven TV. I hope you enjoyed the ride. Yeah, all right. So seriously, I have to sort of go back and step something back I did earlier in this video. Well, not really step it back, but explain it a little bit. I called this thing a rubber duck. Rubber ducky. And that's really what I've been calling this thing all throughout this whole filming exercise, because every one of the vehicles we test here in our office almost always gets a code name. And we can't always share the code names because sometimes they're not all that good. Some of them are cool. Rubber ducky just really fit this one, but I didn't mean it in a derogatory way to make fun of the vehicle so much as it really fits it, because one thing I really noticed about this is that the people at Jeep really went the extra mile to make this thing fun, more than just a box on wheels, right? I mean, the logos everywhere, the little artistic touches. You can tell that the people really wanted to make this thing fun and put a soul in it, because God knows there are so many vehicles out there that don't have a soul. I mean, they're meant to be really good on the Consumer Reports balance sheet so that when you compare it against all the others, it has all the most points and achievements, but they're boring appliances. This is a vehicle that, even though it may not be a Consumer Reports champion, it's fun. It's something that you might aspire to buying just because it tickles your funny bone, and I admire that. I love that in a vehicle. So that's why Rubber Ducky really just kind of fit for me. I wasn't making fun of it. So there you go. If you like the test drive you just saw, click on the link right here on your screen and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because I do like to have fun with these vehicles when I test them, and that does come in once or twice a week. There's always something new. So stay tuned.